I didn't think the end of my 8-year relationship would start with 3 trash bags. Not flowers, not a screaming fight, not some dramatic confession under a streetlight. Just me, 32, exhausted, still wearing my work boots, standing in the doorway of our main bedroom, staring at a floor I couldn't even see. Clothes everywhere. Plates I didn't remember bringing upstairs. A smell that made my stomach tighten before my brain could catch up. Dust, thick enough that it didn't look like mess anymore. It looked like neglect. And the worst part? He was still in the house. My boyfriend, Cade, 31, was curled up in the guest bedroom with the TV on low, like the chaos behind me wasn't real, like it wasn't ours, like it wasn't mine to suffer. For 3 years, we'd lived together in this rented 3-bedroom house, and for most of that time, I'd carried the weight of it. 80% of the bills, the groceries, the utilities, even his driving lessons, because I wanted him to feel independent, confident, like we were building something. I told myself it was love. I told myself partnerships aren't always 50-50. But that day, staring at the bedroom floor, I felt something in me go cold. Not anger yet, not even sadness. Just this awful clarity. Because while I stood there trying to breathe through the shame of how far things had slipped, I realized it wasn't a bad week. It wasn't stress. It was a pattern that had been grinding me down for months. The house only getting cleaned after an argument, promises that evaporated, takeout piling up because cooking didn't happen, my side of the bed disappearing under his stuff until I stopped sleeping there at all. And then there was the other part, the part I didn't say out loud to anyone because it made me feel pathetic. We hadn't been intimate in 8 months. 8 months of being turned away, brushed off, told not tonight, until I stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped feeling like I was allowed to want anything. I had tried being patient. I had tried being gentle. I had tried adult conversations where I didn't accuse, didn't raise my voice, didn't make him feel cornered. But nothing changed. Not until I snapped. Not until I spent 4 straight hours cleaning a room that felt like it belonged to strangers, hauling out 3 bags of dirty clothes that were covered in skin dust, finding plates with food that had been there long enough to change color, and realizing Cade had stayed in the other room the entire time. Watching TV. Like I was the help. That was the moment I reached my breaking point. And I swear, I still didn't know the real betrayal hadn't even shown its face yet. Because a few days later, when he suddenly started cleaning out of nowhere, when I almost let myself believe it meant something, his phone lit up. A message from a name I'd never seen before. And it said, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Don't forget your overnight bag." My hands went numb as I read it. And in that instant, the mess in our bedroom stopped being the worst thing in the house. It was just the beginning. My name is Elena. I'm 32, and I work 45 hours a week at a manufacturing company where sitting down is treated like a luxury you didn't earn. Most days, I come home with my feet throbbing, my shoulders tight, and that hollow kind of tired that doesn't go away with a shower. People assume that kind of schedule makes you cold. It doesn't. It makes you practical. It makes you appreciate stability. It makes you crave a home that feels like a place you can breathe. That was always what I wanted, a quiet, steady life shared with someone who felt like a teammate. And for the first 5 years with Cade, I truly believed I had that. We met when I was 24. He was 23, working retail part-time, charming in a soft way. Never the loudest guy in the room, but the one who paid attention when you spoke. The one who remembered small details. The one who'd text me, "Did you drink water today?" Like he was trying to take care of me even from far away. Our early relationship was easy. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We'd plan little trips, cheap flights, 2 nights somewhere with a view, pretending we were the kind of couple who always knew where they were going. We'd spend lazy Sundays making breakfast and laughing at stupid shows. He'd rest his head on my shoulder like it belonged there. Back then, I used to think love was supposed to feel like that. Simple. When people asked about us, I'd say, "We're good." And it wasn't a performance. It was the truth. So when we hit year 5 and started talking seriously about moving in together, it felt like the next step, like we were finally building a real life, not just dating inside the cracks of separate schedules. We found this 3-bedroom rental house, not because we needed 3 bedrooms, but because it was the best deal in our area. A small backyard, a garage, enough space that we could pretend we were adults with a future. The first night we moved in, we sat on the living room floor eating takeout because we hadn't unpacked the plates yet. Cade leaned his head against my shoulder and said, "This is ours." I remember smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. I didn't know I was smiling at the beginning of the end. The fair agreement. We were both aware, going in, that living together can kill relationships if you don't handle things properly. So we did what I thought responsible adults did. We talked. I laid it out calmly. I work longer hours, I told him, but I don't want to be the only one doing things. Let's split it in a way that makes sense. Cade nodded. He agreed, quickly even, almost too quickly, like he was relieved I wasn't asking for a perfect 50-50. We divided the chores based on time and energy. I would handle the upstairs bathroom, the 2 spare bedrooms, the stairs, hallway, landing. He would handle the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, and our main bedroom. He also said he'd do most of the cooking because he liked it, and he usually got home earlier. It sounded fair on paper. It sounded like a partnership. But I didn't realize at the time that some people agree in conversations the same way they agree to terms and conditions online, click accept, without reading a word. The first shift. The changes didn't happen all at once. That's why I didn't catch them early. At first it was small, a pile of cups in the sink that he'd get to later. A week where he didn't vacuum, and when I mentioned it, he said, "I've just been tired." I didn't want to be nagging. I didn't want to be the kind of girlfriend who turns every evening into a checklist. So I told myself, everyone adjusts differently. Give it time. But time didn't fix it. Time just gave the mess room to grow. 2 months in, I started noticing patterns. The living room would stay messy until I got annoyed. The kitchen would look fine when I came home, until I looked closer and saw the counters weren't actually wiped, just cleared enough to look acceptable. He'd cook maybe once or twice a week, and then the rest of the time he'd say, "Do you want to just order something?" At first, ordering food felt like a treat. Then it became routine. Then it became a problem. Because I was the one paying most of it. The money reality. I made significantly more than Cade. He worked part-time retail, about 25 hours a week, sometimes less. His shifts were almost always daytime, flexible. So naturally I covered more expenses, and I truly didn't resent it in the beginning. I told myself, this is what couples do. One supports the other sometimes. He wanted to get his driver's license, and it mattered to me. I didn't want him stuck. I didn't want him dependent. So when driving lessons came up, I said, I'll help. I paid for them. I also drove him to and from work 3 or 4 times a week, 40-minute round trips. I did it because it felt like love, because he'd squeeze my hand in the car and say, "Thank you, baby." And that gratitude used to make it feel worth it. But somewhere along the way, his gratitude turned into expectation. Like my effort was just the background noise of our lives. Unremarkable. Guaranteed. The health thing. There was also something else that made the mess worse. Something that turned it from annoying to unhealthy. Both of us have skin conditions that cause more dust and skin flakes than average. It's not glamorous, but it's real. It means a house gets dirty faster. It means if you don't keep up, it becomes a problem, not just visually, but physically. I tried explaining it gently. "Cade," I said once, standing in the kitchen, looking at the dust gathering like a second layer of carpet. "We have to stay on top of cleaning for our health." He nodded. He said, "You're right." And then he didn't change. The bedroom becomes a symbol. The worst part, the part that started to feel personal, was our main bedroom. Because the bedroom isn't just a room. It's where you rest, where you feel safe, where you feel wanted. And slowly, ours stopped feeling like that. Clothes started piling up. His clothes, mostly. I'd trip over them at night. Plates started appearing upstairs. Empty cups, candy wrappers, random trash. I'd ask, "Can we keep food out of the bedroom?" He'd shrug. I forgot. He'd promised to clean it on his day off. His day off would come, and he'd stay in bed until mid-afternoon, then move to the couch, then stare at his phone like life was happening somewhere else. Meanwhile, I'd come home from work and feel my chest tighten the second I saw the state of the room. Because it wasn't just mess. It was like our relationship was rotting in plain sight. The distance nobody talks about. And then there was the intimacy. At first, it was just less frequent. A normal dip, a phase. Then it became a month, then 2. When I tried to talk about it, Cade would get quiet, defensive, in a way that made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. "You're making it a big deal," he'd say. Or, "I'm just tired." Or worse, "Can we not talk about this right now?" I started swallowing my needs, telling myself it wasn't important, telling myself love was bigger than sex, bigger than touch, bigger than feeling wanted. But 8 months is a long time to feel like you're living beside someone instead of with them. It started affecting my mental health. I went to my doctor. I admitted out loud that I was struggling with anxiety and depression, that I was having panic attacks, especially in crowded places, that I felt like I was walking around with a permanent weight on my chest. Cade knew. He knew because I told him. And still nothing changed. The pattern of arguments. Every few weeks, it would reach a point where I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I'd try to bring it up calmly. I need more help, I'd say. I can't do everything. Sometimes he'd go silent like he couldn't hear me. Sometimes he'd shout, flipping it on me. Why are you always on my case? Sometimes he'd cry, which was the worst because it made me feel like the villain. And then, after the argument, he'd clean. Not consistently, not because he cared. Just enough to reset the clock. Just enough to make me think, maybe this time it's different. But it never lasted. 2 months, 1 month, 2 weeks. Then the mess would return, thicker than before, like it was proving a point. That was the cycle, and I was stuck inside it. Until the night I found that bedroom, unlovable, and spent 4 hours cleaning while he stayed in another room watching TV. Until the moment I realized I wasn't just exhausted. I was being trained. Trained to accept less. Trained to lower my standards. Trained to believe that if I just carried more weight, things would stabilize again. And I might have kept believing that if his phone hadn't lit up, if that name I'd never seen before hadn't appeared like a crack in the glass, if those words hadn't confirmed what my body already knew before my mind was ready to admit it, Cade wasn't just neglecting the house. He was neglecting me, and someone else was waiting for him with an overnight bag. Looking back, I can see the warning signs so clearly it almost hurts. At the time, though, they didn't arrive as red flags. They came as little discomforts, the kind you explain away because admitting what they mean would force you to make a decision you're not ready for. After that night, the one with the 3 trash bags, and my hands shaking from exhaustion, I told myself I'd reached my limit. I even said it out loud to Cade, standing in the doorway while he sat on the edge of the guest bed, eyes glued to the screen like the conversation was happening somewhere else. I can't do this anymore, I said. My voice wasn't raised. That scared me more than if it had been. This can't keep happening. He sighed, not loudly, just enough to signal inconvenience. I know, he said. I'll fix it. I'd heard those words so many times they barely registered anymore. Still, I wanted to believe him. The sudden change. 2 days later, I came home from work and found the kitchen clean. Not just acceptable, not just cleared off, but actually clean. Counters wiped. Dishes drying on the rack. The trash taken out. For a moment, I just stood there, my bag slipping from my shoulder. It felt like hope. I told myself maybe I'd finally gotten through to him. Maybe the threat of losing me had shaken something loose. Maybe this was what change looked like. Quiet, awkward, late, but real. Cade smiled when he saw my reaction. See, he said, I told you I'd do it. I smiled back. I shouldn't have, but I did. That night, I let myself relax for the first time in weeks. I cooked dinner while he cleaned up afterward. We sat on the couch together. He even reached for my hand. I almost forgot how starved I was for small gestures. But then, his phone started lighting up. The phone that wouldn't stay dark. At first, I didn't pay attention. Everyone's phone buzzes. It's normal. Life is noisy. But his phone didn't just buzz. It lit up constantly. Screen lighting up, going dark, lighting up again. And each time it did, Cade would shift. Turn the screen slightly away from me. Pick it up quickly. Type with his body angled like he was shielding it from view. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, which somehow made it worse. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was already on edge because of everything else. Then he stood up suddenly. I'm going to take a shower, he said, already moving toward the hallway. He left his phone on the coffee table. Face up. That almost never happened. The name. The screen lit up again, just for a second. Long enough for me to see the name. Alex. And the message beneath it. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Don't forget to bring your overnight bag. My breath stopped. It felt like my chest collapsed inward, like someone had scooped the air out of the room and forgotten to put it back. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't need to. Those words were clear enough. There was no innocent explanation, no reasonable spin, no misunderstanding generous enough to cover that sentence. I sat there, staring at the screen as it went dark again, my hands cold, my thoughts racing in circles. Overnight bag. Tomorrow. I heard the shower turn on down the hallway, water pounding against tile like it was mocking me with how normal everything still sounded. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, something else took over, a strange, quiet calm. I wanted to know the truth. The lie that came too easily. The next morning, Cade moved through the house like nothing had changed. He kissed my cheek. He poured himself coffee. He asked what time I worked. I watched him like I was seeing him through glass. I'm going to see my sister this weekend, he said casually, slipping his shoes on. I'll be back Sunday night. He didn't look at me when he said it. Which sister? I asked. He hesitated for half a second too long. Lena. That was when I knew. Because Lena was out of town. I knew that because just the day before, she'd posted photos from a work conference in Denver. I nodded anyway. Okay, I said. He smiled, relieved, grabbed his bag, walked out the door. And that was the moment I realized I was no longer his partner. I was his obstacle, the confirmation. After he left, the house felt eerily quiet. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the clean counters, like they were evidence of something darker now. Then I picked up my phone. I called Lena. I didn't accuse, I didn't explain. I just asked a simple question about a birthday gift we'd once talked about getting together for their mom. Oh, she said, distracted. I'm still in Denver. I won't be back until Tuesday. That was it. No drama, no confrontation. Just truth. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking so hard I had to sit down. The house tells the story. That weekend, while Cade was gone, wherever he really was, I cleaned. Not in a frantic, desperate way like before, in a methodical, almost ceremonial way. Room by room, drawer by drawer, I found more things I hadn't wanted to see before. Plates shoved under the bed. Mold growing in places food should never be. Trash hidden behind furniture. It felt less like laziness now, and more like disrespect. Like he didn't just not care. He assumed I'd eventually clean it up, no matter how bad it got. And as I cleaned, I thought about the last 8 months. The distance, the excuses, the way intimacy had vanished like it was something he'd simply opted out of. I thought about how easy it must have been to find someone else when I was exhausted, distracted, trying to hold everything together. By the time Sunday evening came, the house was spotless, and my heart was strangely steady. The return. When Cade walked through the door, he stopped short. Wow, he said, looking around. You didn't have to do all this. I looked at him. You're right, I said. I didn't. He started telling me about his weekend. Stories about meals they'd eaten, a movie they'd watched. Little details he thought made the lie convincing. I let him finish. Then I asked softly, How was Denver? The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in a long time, Cade didn't know what to say. And in that silence, everything shifted, because the mess in our house had been the warning. But this was the betrayal, and it was about to drag everything else into the light. Cade didn't answer my question right away. He just stood there in the entryway, keys still in his hand, the door half open behind him like he was deciding whether to leave again or finally face what was waiting inside. How was Denver? I repeated. My voice was calm, too calm. It surprised even me. He rubbed the back of his neck. What do you mean? I watched his face as he tried to rearrange reality fast enough to outrun the truth. His eyes darted, searching for a version of this conversation where he could still come out intact. I talked to Lena, I said. She's still there. Conference runs through Tuesday. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy, the kind that presses against your ears. Cade exhaled slowly and set his keys down on the counter like the sound might soften the blow. Okay, he said finally. This isn't what you think. There it was. The sentence that always comes right before the lie gets complicated. The first attempt. He sat down at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, head in his hands like he was the one carrying something unbearable. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. I've been confused. Things have been hard between us for a while. I felt my chest tighten, not because of the words, but because of how familiar they were. How often I'd been the one saying things are hard while he nodded and changed nothing. So you lied, I said. I was going to tell you, he insisted quickly. I just didn't know how. I leaned against the counter, grounding myself with the cool surface under my palms. You packed an overnight bag, I said. That feels pretty planned. His head snapped up. You saw my phone? I didn't answer. Because suddenly the phone wasn't the issue. The trust was. The admission. Cade stared at the table for a long time, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jump. Her name is Alex, he said finally. We met at work. The words landed like dull thuds, one after another. How long? I asked. He hesitated. Cade. About 2 months. 2 months. 2 months of coming home to me. 2 months of watching me clean our house. 2 months of listening to me talk about stress and health and exhaustion, while he was building a separate life somewhere else. You said nothing physical happened, he added quickly, like he could still control the narrative. We just talked. Hung out. I almost laughed. You don't pack an overnight bag to talk, I said. His shoulders slumped. Okay, he whispered. Something happened. There it was. The truth. Stripped of decoration. The body keeps the score. My hands started shaking then. Not violently. Just enough that I had to curl my fingers into fists to steady them. I felt hot and cold at the same time. My heart was racing, but my head felt distant, like I was watching myself from far away. I noticed small, stupid details. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint smell of cleaning spray still lingering in the air. The way the house looked better than it ever had, right as everything inside it collapsed. Why? I asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Cade swallowed. I felt stuck, he said. Like nothing I did was ever enough for you. That one hurt more than I expected. Because I had been asking for the bare minimum. I asked you to clean, I said. I asked you to show up. I asked you to be my partner. I know, he said quickly, and I messed up. But I was scared. I didn't want to fight all the time. So you cheated, I said. The word hung between us, sharp and undeniable. He flinched. The ask. I love you, he said suddenly, voice breaking. I do. This doesn't have to end like this. Something inside me cracked then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that I felt it. 8 years flashed through my mind. Trips, inside jokes, nights curled together on the couch, the version of him I fell in love with. And then I saw the bedroom floor again, the trash bags, the mold, the months of being unwanted. I shook my head. You don't get to say that now, I said. Not after you chose someone else instead of fixing what we had. He reached for my hand. I stepped back. I need you to leave, I said. His eyes widened. Just for a few days, I added. I need space to think. He opened his mouth to argue, to bargain, to promise, but something in my face must have stopped him. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I'll pack some things. He didn't pack like someone leaving for a few days. He packed like someone who knew. The aftermath of the night. After he left, the house felt enormous. Too quiet, too clean, too empty. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, our bed, and stared at the spot where he used to sleep. His side was still covered in his things, like a physical reminder that I'd already been pushed out long before he walked out the door. My chest hurt. Not in a dramatic, crying on the floor way, but in a constant, aching pressure that made it hard to breathe deeply. I didn't sleep much. And somewhere between midnight and morning, I realized this wasn't just about cheating. It was about years of being taken for granted. About how easily he'd let me carry everything until someone else offered him an escape. The mess, the silence, the distance, they hadn't been accidents. They'd been choices. And this confrontation was only the beginning of the fallout. The first morning without Cade in the house felt unreal. I woke up before my alarm, heart racing, my body braced like it was waiting for something to go wrong. For a few seconds, I forgot. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet, my mind blank. Then it came back. The lie. The name on the phone. The way his face drained when I said Denver. My chest tightened, and I had to sit up just to breathe properly. The house was silent, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that echoes. The kind that forces you to hear your own thoughts, whether you want to or not. I walked into the kitchen and automatically reached for a mug he used to leave on the counter. It wasn't there. Everything was exactly where I'd left it the night before. Clean, orderly, still empty. The self-blame spiral. For the first few days, I moved through my life on autopilot. Work, commute, shower, bed, repeat. At work, I smiled when people spoke to me. I answered emails. I did my job. No one knew that inside my head, a quiet interrogation was playing on a loop. Did I push too hard? Should I have been more patient? Did I make him feel small? I replayed every argument in my mind, every time I'd brought up chores, money, intimacy, searching for the moment where I crossed some invisible line. That kind of thinking is seductive. It makes you feel like you still have control. Like if you can identify the mistake, you can undo the outcome. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, another truth crept in. I hadn't asked for too much. I'd asked for basic respect, and somewhere deep down I knew that. The house without him. Living alone in the house felt strange at first. Not lonely, lighter. I'd come home and the kitchen would look exactly how I left it that morning. I'd cook dinner, clean up afterward, and the mess wouldn't magically reappear overnight. The bedroom stayed clean. The bed felt bigger, colder. I slept on my side for the first few nights, curled inward, like my body hadn't caught up with the reality yet. And then there was the relief I felt guilty for. I didn't have to brace myself when I walked into a room. I didn't have to wonder what state I'd find things in. That relief scared me more than the sadness. The return. 5 days after he left, Cade came back to collect more of his things. He texted first. Can I come by this afternoon? I don't want to surprise you. I appreciated that, even though the bar was so low it almost made me angry. I told him I'd be at work until 6. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, his car was already there. My stomach dropped. He was standing in the living room when I walked in, surrounded by half-filled boxes. He looked tired, unshaven, smaller somehow. Hey, he said softly. Hey! We stood there for a moment, two people who used to share everything, now unsure how to occupy the same space. I didn't take anything that's yours, he said quickly. I made sure. Okay. He nodded, like he was relieved I hadn't accused him of more. I just wanted to explain, he said. I crossed my arms, not defensively, just to ground myself. You already did. I wasn't happy, he said. I didn't know how to say it without hurting you. I looked at him then, really looked at him. You hurt me anyway, I said. You just chose the way that was easiest for you. He didn't argue. That told me everything. The practical talk. We sat at the table to talk logistics. The lease. 7 months left. Both our names on it. No clean solution. He agreed to keep paying his share of the rent. I made a mental note to get it in writing later. We talked about furniture, dishes, things that had quietly become mine without me realizing it. He didn't fight me on anything. That hurt too in its own way, because it felt like confirmation that he'd already moved on. When he left that night, he took more than he'd planned. Clothes, shoes, personal items. I watched his car disappear down the street and felt something inside me settle, not in peace, but in finality. The missing things. It was 2 days later that I noticed something was wrong. I was looking for my grandfather's watch, the one thing I never left lying around carelessly. It had been in the drawer by the bed, always. The drawer was empty. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I checked again. Then another drawer. Then the electronics cabinet. My heart started pounding. Several things were gone. I texted Cade. Did you take my watch by accident? And the tablet? His reply came quickly. No, I didn't touch your stuff. But a few hours later, a mutual friend messaged me. This is awkward, but I saw Cade wearing your grandfather's watch. He said it was a gift. My hands went cold. That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. Cheating was one thing. Lying was another. But stealing from me, stealing something irreplaceable and giving it to someone else, that erased whatever sympathy I had left. Drawing the line. I filed a police report. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Calm. Necessary. When an officer contacted Cade, he denied it at first. Then the watch reappeared, along with the other items. No apology. Just a short text. I didn't think it would be a big deal. That sentence closed the door for good. The shift. That night, alone in the house, I sat on the couch and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Resolve. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who didn't want to understand. 8 years was a long time, but not long enough to justify losing myself completely. Whatever came next, lawyers, moving, rebuilding, I knew one thing for certain. I was done carrying someone who refused to stand on their own. And the worst part? I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just finished. I thought the worst part would be the breakup itself. I was wrong. The real damage came afterward, when the story stopped being just ours and started leaking into the outside world, twisting as it went. The quiet smear. At first, it was subtle. A friend stopped texting back as quickly. Another canceled plans without rescheduling. Little things I might not have noticed if I hadn't already been hyper-aware of everything. Then it reached me, secondhand, the way these things always do. Someone I barely spoke to anymore messaged me late one night. Hey, I just wanted to check in. Cade's been saying you were really controlling, that you had unrealistic expectations about housework and money. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. Controlling. Because I asked him to clean the rooms he'd agreed to clean. Because I didn't want mold growing under our bed. Because I didn't want to bankroll a life he wasn't participating in. I didn't reply. I learned very quickly that defending yourself to people who've already picked a side is like shouting into the wind. It costs energy and changes nothing. His world, his echo chamber. Cade's friends rallied around him. They always had. They praised him for finally standing up for himself. They joked online about freedom and new beginnings. One of his friends even commented publicly on a photo he posted after moving out. Living the dream, man. I saw it while scrolling mindlessly one night, my phone glowing in the dark bedroom. I didn't cry. I just felt tired. Meanwhile, his new life seemed to be moving fast. I heard through mutual connections that he was spending most nights at Alex's place, that they were basically living together already. That stung, not because I wanted him back, but because it confirmed what I'd already suspected. He hadn't left me because he was unhappy. He'd left because someone else was willing to carry him. The friends who noticed. Not everyone bought his version of events. 2 of my closest friends pulled me aside one weekend after insisting I come out with them. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically, but something in their voices made me agree. You don't laugh anymore, one of them said gently. You look like you're always bracing for something. That was when I realized how much of myself I'd lost without noticing. I told them the truth. Not every detail, not the ugly parts, but enough. They listened. They didn't interrupt. They didn't offer fixes. They just believed me. That mattered more than I expected. The parents' visit. About 3 months before everything finally ended, Cade's parents had come to visit. I remembered it now with fresh clarity. The frantic cleaning beforehand. The way I'd spent an entire day scrubbing while Cade slept until noon, then took his time getting ready, like the house would magically prepare itself. His mother had smiled around the living room and said, "Wow, you keep such a lovely home." She'd said it like it was a compliment. I hadn't corrected her. I didn't want to embarrass him. Now I wondered why I'd protected him so carefully when he hadn't protected me at all. The cost adds up. Financially, things got tighter before they got better. Without Cade's partial contribution, the house was suddenly too much. The rent, the utilities, the space itself felt excessive, like I was rattling around in a shell that no longer fit my life. I started looking at smaller apartments, closer to work, cheaper. The idea of leaving the house felt bittersweet, not because of memories with him, but because I'd poured so much effort into keeping it functional. Still, the thought of a place that would stay clean because I lived there felt like freedom. The anxiety surfaces. The stress didn't disappear just because he was gone. If anything, it surfaced in new ways. My anxiety spiked. I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, my mind replaying arguments that were already over. I finally admitted to myself that I needed help. I booked an appointment with a mental health professional, something I'd been putting off for years, because there was always something else to deal with. Those first sessions were brutal. I talked about exhaustion, about resentment, about how I'd kept lowering my standards because I was afraid of being alone. My therapist didn't judge. She just listened and gently pointed out patterns I hadn't wanted to name. The missing defense. What surprised me most was how little Cade defended himself when things escalated. When I didn't engage, when I didn't chase, when I didn't argue publicly or privately. He seemed almost confused, like he'd expected me to fight harder to keep him, like my silence unsettled him more than anger ever could. The house changes tone. As weeks passed, the house felt different. Not healed, but honest. I cooked for myself. I cleaned because it mattered to me. I slept better knowing I wouldn't wake up to new messes or broken promises. The emptiness slowly transformed into space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to see the relationship for what it had been. Not just at the end, but for a long time. I started to understand something painful and freeing at the same time. Cade hadn't slowly drifted away. He'd been gone for months. He'd just let me keep doing the work. And as that realization settled in, something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but into clarity. Because if this was the escalation, I knew a darker moment was coming. And I also knew, deep down, that I wasn't going to break the way I once would have. The lowest point didn't come with shouting or tears. It came quietly, on a Tuesday night, when I realized how alone I had been long before Cade ever packed a bag. I was sitting on the living room floor, back against the couch, surrounded by half-filled boxes. I'd been sorting through 8 years of shared life, deciding what stayed and what went. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. My phone lay face down beside me, deliberately ignored. That was the night it hit me. Not just that the relationship was over, but that I had disappeared inside it. The weight of what I'd carried. I picked up a box labeled miscellaneous, the kind of label you use when you don't want to think too hard about what's inside. I pulled out random things, old cables, ticket stubs, a photo of us from years ago when we still looked hopeful. I stared at that photo for a long time. We were younger, lighter, standing close enough that our shoulders touched. I remembered the version of myself in that picture, the woman who laughed easily, who believed effort would always be met halfway. I wondered when she stopped expecting that, and the answer hurt more than I thought it would. She stopped the first time she cleaned up after him without saying anything. The first time she paid a bill he forgot. The first time she accepted distance instead of asking why it existed. I'd told myself I was being understanding. What I'd really been doing was myself. The loneliness. Inside the relationship. The hardest truth wasn't that he cheated. It was that I'd been lonely with him. Lonely in a shared bed that stopped feeling like mine. Lonely in conversations where I spoke and he nodded. Lonely in a house I maintained for someone who treated it like a hotel. That realization knocked the breath out of me, because it meant the breakup didn't create the loneliness. It just revealed it, the physical crash. That week, my body finally caught up with everything my mind had been suppressing. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like nothing. Sleep came in fragments. Short, restless stretches broken by anxious jolts that sent my heart racing. At work, I caught myself staring into space, forgetting what I'd been doing mid-task. Once in the bathroom, I had to grip the sink and wait for the room to stop spinning. I hated that part. Hated feeling weak. Hated feeling like I'd lost control of my own body. But even then, especially then, I noticed something else. No one was making it worse anymore. There were no new messes waiting at home, no arguments looming, no disappointment resetting the clock. The pain was mine now, but so was the silence. The night I almost broke. That Friday, I almost called him. I don't know why. Habit, maybe? Muscle memory? I'd had a long day. Something small had gone wrong. Nothing serious, just enough to tip me over the edge. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hand, his name right there. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like to hear his voice. The comfort of familiarity. The lie that it would make things easier. Then I remembered the watch. The lie about Denver. The overnight bag. I turned the phone face down and let myself cry for the first time since he'd left. Not sobbing, just quiet tears, steady, exhausted, necessary. I cried for the years I'd spent hoping things would change, for the version of myself I'd neglected, for the realization that love doesn't survive on effort alone. When the tears stopped, something shifted. I didn't feel better, but I felt clear, hitting bottom without falling apart. The dark moment wasn't dramatic. There was no breakdown on the floor, no screaming into pillows. It was the understanding that I had reached the end of what I could give, and that was okay. I didn't need to, myself anymore. I didn't need to keep asking what I could have done differently, because the truth was simple and brutal. I had done enough, and staying would have cost me everything that was left. I lay back on the bed that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling empty, but not hollow. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to change. I was waiting for myself to move. And somewhere in that stillness, I knew the next step wouldn't be about survival. It would be about choice. The shift didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single morning where I woke up strong, confident, healed. What happened instead was quieter and more permanent. The moment of evidence. It started with a message from a mutual friend, someone neutral, someone who had stayed out of everything. Hey, I didn't want to get involved before, but I think you should know this. Attached was a photo, Cade and Alex, sitting at a cafe near his workplace, her bag on the chair beside her, his jacket draped over the back like he already belonged there. The timestamp mattered. The date was from weeks before the night I found the message on his phone. Before the confession, before the confusion, before the lie about Denver. I stared at the image for a long time. Not because it shocked me, but because it confirmed something I'd been resisting. This hadn't been a mistake that spiraled. It had been a choice that was already comfortable. The truth clicks into place. For months, I'd tried to understand what I'd done wrong. I'd analyzed my tone, my timing, my expectations. But looking at that photo, something in my chest finally relaxed, because I saw it clearly now. Cade hadn't withdrawn because I was difficult. He'd withdrawn because responsibility bored him, and someone else offered escape without expectations. The housework, the bills, the conversations, the emotional labor. Those weren't burdens created by me. They were burdens he no longer wanted to carry. And instead of saying that honestly, he let me absorb the weight until I broke. The choice I'd been avoiding. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through listings for one-bedroom apartments near my work. I'd looked before, casually, like it was an idea I might consider someday. This time I filtered seriously. Budget, commute, lease terms. I scheduled viewings, not because I was running away, but because I was choosing myself. There was a strange calm in that decision. No panic, no desperation. Just certainty, reclaiming my voice. I also stopped staying silent. Not publicly, not online, but in the places that mattered. When someone asked me what happened, I told the truth, briefly, without drama. He cheated, he stopped contributing, I left. I didn't justify it. I didn't soften it. I didn't protect him anymore. And something interesting happened. People stopped arguing with me, because there was nothing to push against. The final boundary. A week later, Cade texted, "Can we talk? I think we both said things we didn't mean." I read the message once. Then I put the phone down. I didn't reply that night. Or the next day. Silence, I realized, wasn't avoidance. It was a boundary. Eventually, I sent one message. "There's nothing left to discuss. Please only contact me about the lease." That was it. No emotion, no explanation. I didn't owe him clarity. I owed it to myself. The new awareness. Therapy started to feel different after that. Less about surviving. More about understanding. I started to see how fear of being alone had kept me tolerating things I shouldn't have. How I'd confused patience with self-sacrifice. How love without reciprocity slowly turns into self-neglect. These weren't easy realizations, but they were empowering. Because they meant I could do better. Not by changing someone else, but by changing what I accepted. the decision. By the end of that week, I'd put down a deposit on a small apartment 15 minutes from work. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. No guest room for avoidance. No extra space for resentment to collect dust. Just a place that would reflect exactly how much effort I put into it, which I knew now was more than enough. As I signed the paperwork, my hands were steady, not because I wasn't scared, but because fear was no longer in control. For the first time in years, my life wasn't waiting on someone else to show up. It was moving forward because I finally chose to move with it, and that choice changed everything. The consequences didn't come crashing down all at once. They unfolded slowly, quietly, like gravity finally catching up. Watching the story collapse, I didn't seek updates about Cade's life. They found me anyway. At first, it was small things. Mutual friends who'd gone silent before started reaching out again, not to apologize outright, but with that careful tone people use when their certainty has begun to crack. "He seems stressed," one of them said during a casual conversation. "Living together so fast has been harder than he expected." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I already knew how this story went. The pattern repeats. About a month after I moved into my new apartment, I ran into Cade and Alex by accident at a grocery store near my place. I hadn't planned for it. I hadn't prepared. I was reaching for coffee when I heard my name. I turned. Cade looked thinner, tired in a way that wasn't temporary. Alex stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the exit like she was counting seconds. We exchanged polite hellos, nothing more. When I turned back toward the aisle, I felt relief wash through me, not pain. As I walked away, I heard Alex whisper something sharply under her breath. Cade sighed. The sound was familiar. Later that week, a friend told me what I already suspected. "They're fighting," she said, "about cleaning, about money, about him not helping." I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished, because it meant the problem had never been me. The narrative shifts. Over time, the tone around him changed. People stopped congratulating him on his fresh start. They started noticing how often he complained, how little he contributed, how he always seemed to be waiting for someone else to manage the boring parts of life. A few friends who had once quietly sided with him reached out. "I didn't know how bad it was," one admitted. "I'm sorry I didn't listen." I accepted their apologies without reopening the wound. I didn't need justice. I needed peace. My life without the noise. Meanwhile, my world grew quieter and stronger. My apartment stayed clean with minimal effort. I cooked meals that actually got eaten. I slept through the night. I reconnected with hobbies I'd abandoned without noticing. Long walks, music playing softly while I cleaned. Mornings that didn't start with resentment. Therapy helped me understand something crucial. I hadn't failed. I had outgrown a dynamic that required me to shrink. The final proof. The last update came from an unexpected source. A mutual acquaintance told me Cade had been venting, again, about feeling unsupported. About how Alex didn't understand him. About how living together was harder than he thought. I smiled sadly when I heard that, because I understood him perfectly, and I was no longer responsible for carrying that understanding alone, letting the consequences stand. I never confronted him. I never demanded an apology. I let the truth do what it always does when left alone long enough. It echoed. It showed up in patterns. It revealed itself in every place effort was required and accountability was avoided. And while his world narrowed under the weight of those choices, mine expanded. I didn't win. I walked away. And that turned out to be far more powerful. I used to think healing would feel loud, like some triumphant moment where I'd wake up whole again, free of memories, untouched by what I'd lost. It didn't happen like that. Healing arrived quietly, in the absence of chaos. The life that replaced survival. My new apartment became a kind of mirror. What I put into it is what it gives back. If I cook, the kitchen stays warm and alive. If I clean, it stays clean. If I rest, no one makes me feel guilty for it. There's no resentment building in corners. No arguments waiting in the next room. No silent tally of who owes whom. For the first time in years, my home feels like it belongs to me. And that changed everything. The final closure. Cade never apologized. Not properly, not honestly. And that used to bother me, until I realized something important. Closure doesn't require permission from the person who hurt you. It comes from understanding, from seeing patterns clearly enough that you stop blaming yourself for someone else's refusal to grow. I don't hate him. I don't miss him. I miss the version of us that existed before I started carrying the weight alone, but I no longer confuse that memory with the reality we were living in. What I learned. Here's the truth I wish I'd understood sooner. Love isn't proven by endurance. Staying through neglect doesn't make you loyal. Explaining yourself over and over doesn't make you patient. Lowering your standards doesn't make you kind. It makes you invisible, and no relationship is worth disappearing for. The strength I didn't know I had. I'm more cautious now. Not closed, not bitter, just aware. I pay attention to how people treat their own lives, their space, their responsibilities, their words. Because someone who can't manage their own world will always expect you to manage it for them. I won't do that again. The ending that isn't an end. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my couch with a cup of tea and think about how close I came to staying. How easily I could have accepted another apology, another half effort, another promise that faded by morning. And then I look around, at the quiet, at the calm, at the life that feels like mine again. Walking away wasn't failure. It was the bravest decision I've ever made. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you feel exhausted, unseen, or like you're carrying everything alone, please hear this. You're not asking for too much. You're just asking the wrong person. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And sometimes it's the beginning of everything.